No, si me deja. Sí. Ya, aquí está. Ahí está. Sí, 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 sí. Sí, algo. Tengo que quitarle el efecto. ¿Dónde está el efecto?
Ahí que le ponía cosa lo es.
Ya.
Mira la prueba.
Pero no puedo. I feel so bad, I got a broad mind. I feel so bad, I got a... Me olvidó la letra. I feel so bad, I got it wrong.
¿Lo tenéis claro ya?
Sí,
¿Con eso de basta?
sí, sí, sí.
Y después cuando ella suba, ella se va a alejar el micrófono. Este mismo micrófono.
7 nickels, 7 times.
Voy a quiero ver el atril, que lo tengo acá.
No voy a ocupar atril, por si acaso.
Ah, no,
No, voy a ocupar inalámbrico, así nomás.
Entonces ese mismo.
¿Qué hago con él? ¿Lo llevo para allá?
¿Quieres que probemos una vez más el pinzas? O ya es suficiente para ti. Listo. Y ella sabe anetar.
¿Ya?
Muy fuerte,
Sí.
Que no sé qué voy a sentir abajo, ese es el problema.
sí. Ahí todavía no lo aprendí.
Bueno,
pero cuando vuelva a nosotros nomás se baja, voy a la cartilla de memoria. Ahí la voy a acordar en 5 minutos para ¿ya? Aunque seáis muy joven, porque la canción es tan bonita que la conocen todos los niños.
Ya.
No sé.
Ya, está muy bien con los niños.
Vamos a ver si. Pero confíe que.
¿Y solucionaste el otro problema?
Sí.
Ay, qué bueno. Me pasó una vez la vida así, que se me cayó el sistema de luz. Todos los 5 minutos antes pasaron los cosas.
Yo parece que tengo muy poco tiempo para probar y ver cosas.
Claro.
Sí, no sé, es fácil.
Estamos entonces, lo llevamos un micrófono también para
Sí.
¿Dónde lo dejo arriba del piano?
Lo bueno es seguro que lo pongas arriba del piano.
O sobre el pandero.
O sobre el pandero.
Sí, sí.
Sobre pandero
Sobre el
mejor.
pandero, porque ahí
Sí.
está el violín. Sobre el pandero. Ya. Gracias.
Gracias, está prendido, así que no tengo que hacer nada.
Cecilia, no funciona. Estimados y estimadas, antes de dar inicio a esta ceremonia, les pido encarecidamente que apaguemos nuestros teléfonos celulares o los pongamos en modo avión para poder dar inicio a este gran evento. Voy a dar un minutito para si llega más gente y para que nos podamos sentar. Pues bien, Señoras y señores, muy buenas tardes. La Universidad de Chile y la Facultad de Ciencias Químicas y Farmacéuticas de la Universidad de Chile les dan a todos y a todas la más cordial bienvenida a esta gran ceremonia de bienvenida a la solemne que entrega la más alta distinción académica a nuestra universidad, así que no podemos dejar eso de lado. La entrega de la medalla Doctor Honoris Causa al distinguido científico Dr. Stephen Smith. Preside esta ceremonia la rectora subrogante de la Universidad de Chile, profesora Alejandra Misala Salces, y la acompañan en la mesa de honor nuestro decano, profesor Pablo Richter Duc, y por supuesto nuestro invitado especial, el Dr. Steven. Nos honran también con su presencia el decano de la Facultad de Artes, profesor Fernando Carrasco, autoridades universitarias, miembros de la facultad, nuestro cuerpo académico y por supuesto también estudiantes que los veo por ahí atrás. Así que sean todos muy bienvenidos. Pero creo que no puedo empezar esta ceremonia sin dedicar unas palabras personales a Dr. Steven. So I'm going to take a minute off script because honestly, I felt the need to do it. I think I couldn't bear the thought of hosting such an important ceremony without being able to speak your same language. And I know there are translators around you, but I feel the need to do it, so I'm gonna do it. But we actually met last year, and I don't know if you remember me, but I had to take your picture. And I was kind of nervous because I was still a student myself, and I was new at this job. So I was really anxious because I knew that I was going to speak with a genius, basically. And when I met you, actually you made a joke about it was if I was going to take your good or bad side, and that made me feel really confident about myself, and that made me feel safe. And a year later, here I am, hosting one of the most meaningful events in our faculty and university. So I really appreciate this moment. I know that we all do. So now it's time for the music. So I truly hope you enjoy it. Bueno, para dar inicio a esta ceremonia, el violinista Elías Allendez, acompañado de la pianista Bárbara Pavés, ya los conocemos, y el chelista, por supuesto, Juan Ángel Muñoz, nos interpretarán las 4 estaciones del gran Antonio Vivaldi, La Primavera. Un gran aplauso, por favor. Sé que somos pocos, pero creo que podemos hacer un poquito de ruido. Agradecemos a nuestros artistas y a continuación con ustedes dejamos al señor decano de nuestra facultad, el profesor Pablo Richter Duque. Un gran aplauso, por favor.
Rectora subrogante, profesora Alejandra Misala, doctor honoris causa, profesor Steven Smith, vicedecana, profesora Paz Robert, decano de la Facultad de Artes, profesor Fernando Carrasco, director de Relaciones Internacionales, profesor Christian Wilson, autoridades universitarias presentes, académicos y estudiantes, invitados especiales, señoras y señores. La distinción honoris causa se concede a personas chilenas o extranjeras que en virtud de sus méritos o de sus sobresalientes acciones en beneficio de la nación chilena o de la humanidad se han destacado a nivel nacional o internacional. Ese es el más alto reconocimiento de nuestra casa de estudios. Confiere a las personalidades excepcionales, siendo la primera persona en recibir esta distinción. En 1954, el Premio Nobel de Literatura, Gabriela Mistral. Precisamente ese año, y este año 2025, considerando lo anterior, se cumplen 80 años desde que la intelectual chilena recibiera el Premio Nobel de manos del rey de Suecia, Gustavo V, en diciembre del año 45, transformándose en la primera persona latinoamericana en obtener el máximo galardón de las letras. Ese mismo año, el 1 de julio, se creó la Facultad de Ciencias Químicas y Farmacéuticas de la Universidad de Chile, cuyos orígenes se remontan a la clase de farmacia de la sección universitaria del Instituto Nacional en 1833. pasando por la creación de la Escuela de Farmacia, después en 1911 en la Facultad de Medicina, hasta su reconocimiento como facultad. Primer nombre fue de Química y Farmacia, hace ya 80 años. Nos congrega hoy el propósito de honrar una trayectoria vital dedicada al avance del conocimiento, a la innovación tecnológica y muy especialmente a la construcción de lazos de colaboración y generosidad que han trascendido fronteras, impactando de manera profunda y perdurable el desarrollo científico de nuestro país. La concesión de esta distinción representa el reconocimiento de nuestra comunidad a una figura fundamental de la biofísica contemporánea y al mismo tiempo a un amigo invaluable de la Universidad de Chile y también de nuestra facultad. En la sesión ordinaria número 11 del año 24, realizada el 24 de diciembre, el Consejo de nuestra facultad aprobó por unanimidad proponer a la señora rectora conceder el grado de doctor honoris causa de la Universidad de Chile al doctor Smith. Esto ante la propuesta de la Dirección de Relaciones Internacionales de la Facultad, apoyada por el Departamento de Bioquímica y Biología Molecular. De seguida, el Consejo Universitario, en su tercera sesión ordinaria del año 2025, desarrollado el 25 de marzo, finalmente aprobó por unanimidad conceder esta distinción al mencionado doctor Smith. El doctor Stephen Smith es un físico y científico de renombre internacional, pionero en el campo de la manipulación de moléculas individuales de ADN. Sus contribuciones han revolucionado el desarrollo científico global en el área de la biofísica. Licenciado en física por la Universidad de Washington en 1985, magíster en la misma disciplina y doctor en física aplicada por la Universidad de Twente en 1998. El doctor Smith ha desarrollado técnicas innovadoras como el uso de pinzas magnéticas y ópticas, transformando el estudio de las moléculas de ADN mediante métodos avanzados de fluorescencia. Entre sus logros destacan el desarrollo del equipo Mini Twister, patentado en el año 2006, así como la caracterización de la estructura S del DNA. Él ha publicado artículos de gran impacto, con un elevado número de citas, y su trabajo ha influido en investigadores fundamentales de la biofísica. El doctor Smith también ha impulsado la biofísica en Latinoamérica, colaborado con universidades de Chile y Perú en la creación de laboratorios de pinzas ópticas y en el diseño de equipos únicos para el estudio de moléculas individuales. Además, ha realizado significativas donaciones y compartido de manera altruista su conocimiento técnico, fortaleciendo capacidades tecnológicas en la región. En Chile ha trabajado estrechamente con los profesores Christian Wilson y Mauricio Páez, contribuyendo al desarrollo del Departamento de Bioquímica y Biología Molecular. Cabe destacar que el doctor Smith no ha seguido la trayectoria convencional de un académico adscrito a una universidad, sino que ha dedicado su carrera a la invención y transformación de disciplinas científicas. Actualmente dirige una empresa dedicada al diseño y consultoría de equipos de manipulación de moléculas individuales. Sus contribuciones han sido fundamentales para el trabajo de figuras como el profesor Stephen Chu, Premio Nobel de Física en 1997, y del profesor Carlos Bustamante, distinguido como doctor honoris causa de nuestra universidad en 2015, también a propuesta de nuestra facultad. En respaldo a la presentación del doctor Smith, a esta alta distinción se recibieron numerosas cartas de apoyo de destacadas personalidades nacionales e internacionales de las ciencias, así como de directivos universitarios. Entre ellos, los ya mencionados, el doctor Stephen Chu, Premio Nobel, del Stanford University en Estados Unidos, y el doctor Carlos Bustamante, de la Universidad de California en Berkeley. También de los premios nacionales Ramón Latorre y Cecilia Hidalgo, del señor rector de la Universidad de Concepción, Carlos Saavedra, entre otros destacados científicos y académicos nacionales y extranjeros. La distinción de doctor honoris causa al doctor Stephen Smith constituye un merecido reconocimiento a su trayectoria científica y a sus contribuciones al desarrollo de la biofísica y de la ciencia tanto en Chile como en el mundo. Apreciado doctor Smith, por su espíritu pionero que le permitió ver lo que nadie antes había visto, y con ello abrir un nuevo campo del saber humano. Por su ingenio excepcional, que transformó ideas audaces en instrumentos que han empoderado a científicos de todo el mundo para explorar los misterios de la vida a una escala sin precedentes, y muy especialmente por su profunda y sostenida generosidad, por su rol como mentor y por su contribución a la transformadora al desarrollo de la ciencia en Chile, por haber construido puentes de conocimiento y amistad que enriquecen a nuestra comunidad y nos inspiran a perseguir la excelencia. La Universidad de Chile, en un acto de justicia y de profunda gratitud, se enorgullece de acogerlo en su seno y conferirle su más alta distinción, el grado de doctor honoris causa. Además, nos llena de felicidad que este acto esté enmarcado en el contexto del 80º aniversario de nuestra querida facultad. Doble motivo de alegría, uniendo hoy su nombre al de una pléyade de personalidades de talla mundial que han recibido esta distinción, donde su nombre hoy se escribe con la fuerza de la justicia y con las manos colmadas de generosidad. Muchas gracias por dar tanto a Chile y a la ciencia, doctor Steven Smith, doctor honoris causa de la Universidad de Chile. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, decano. Pues bien, en primer término y para hacer la presentación correspondiente a nuestro homenajeado, se dirige a ustedes a quien lo hizo posible, nuestro académico Cristian Wilson Moya, director de Relaciones Internacionales de la Facultad, y que creo que merece un gran aplauso y que recibe la dirección como corresponde, ¿no? Gran aplauso, por favor.
Gracias. I have a presentation. Acá. Okay. Hola, muchas gracias. Voy a hacer, como dice Fernanda, la presentación de Steve Smith. Señora rectora subrogante, profesora Alejandra Misala, decano de nuestra facultad, profesor Paulo Richter, doctor honoris causa, profesor Steve Smith, decano de la Facultad de Artes, profesor Fernando Carrasco, autoridades universitarias presentes, académicos, estudiantes, funcionarios, invitados especiales, señores y señoras, señoras y señores. Esta presentación la voy a hacer en inglés, pero no se preocupen, mi inglés parece mucho al castellano, así que van a poder entender, pero como hay varios invitados online de habla inglesa, voy a hacer mi presentación en inglés. I will do my presentation, I will change to English, but as I say, my English is very similar to the Spanish, then don't worry, but there is a lot of people online that speak English, and I would like that everybody could understand the presentation and who Steve Smith is. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, it's my greatest honor to introduce Professor Steve Smith for the doctorate honoris causa of the University of Chile. He will be giving a talk, Early Days of Single Molecule Manipulation with DNA, and I will want to talk a little bit about Steve Smith and who he is. Steve Smith, thank you for being here. We're really happy. I will start from the beginnings, okay? Steve Smith, born in Seattle in 1946, and since he was very child, okay, Steve, can you sit down in order you can see my...
That way I can see it.
Yeah, you can see my presentation. And you will surprise about the picture that I got, Steve. Here the beginnings, Steve Smith, born in Seattle in 1946, and when he was very kid, he started doing science but since very child, and he won a science fair in middle school doing this instrument, a spark generator, and also when he was a teenager, he created an electron cyclotron in the living room of his house with a friend, Norman Alquist, and he started doing a lot of research, and since very child. As the dean said, he studied in 1985 the Bachelor of Master in Physics in the University of Washington. In 1998, he was PhD in Applied Physics in the University of Twente. And from 1982, he was Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator in part of the laboratory of Carlos Bustamante. Also, he created some companies. For example, his first company is the Moonlight Cat Door Company, in which he created the first automatic door to allow the cat enter to the house. Yes, and he used magnet in the cat and in the door. That's why the cat can enter, and if some raccoon or something has chasing the cat, the door will be closed and nothing can enter. And this was his first company. You can see a young Steve Smith in his new company. And today, as I didn't say, he has a new company called Stephen B. Smith Engineering, where he still sells and create different mini tweezers and optical tweezers. And I would like to explain you why it's so important the contribution of Steve. He was actually a game changer in the understanding of molecules. Before Steve, people want to understand how protein works or how DNA works. For example, since the development of microscope, in 1666, Marcello Malpighi, looking at the different bacteria moving around the water, he thought the operative industry of nature is so prolific that machine will be eventually found not only unknown to us, but also unimaginable by our mind. But nobody was able to study this molecule one at a time, and nobody was able to manipulate. And Steve, doing his master's degree, he found a way that he was able, with electrophoresis, take one DNA, one at a time, and he was able to manipulate the DNA. And then the story of science changes. That was great because in parallel, another professor, Carlos Bustamante, as you know well because has been here many times, he was doing exactly the same experiment. And both of them decided to work together to create the new field of manipulation of single molecules. Here there are the co-founder of the field of single molecule manipulation. You can see Steve Smith, Carlos Bustamante, some of their students as Miklos Keller-Mayer. Here, Carlos Bustamante, Steve Smith, and Warren, that is his son, that is here today from Spain. And here is one of the first team that they did a lot of the single molecule manipulation work. Ignacio Tinoco, Steve Smith, Viviano Noah, Jan Liebhardt, and Carlos Bustamante. As our dean say, Steve creates many techniques. For example, in Carlos Bustamante laboratory, he invented a technique that's called magnetic twister, in which you apply magnet to generate force on a bit. He will explain in detail in his talk. This technique was invented in 1993. And if you can see, now the number of paper is increasing exponentially, all the paper that use this technique of magnetic twister. Also, he was one of the developer of the mini twister that use the conservation of light momentum to study force on protein, DNA, or different biomolecules. And the same with the first paper of Steve and Carlos, see how many papers and people is using this instrument today. This is number of paper and the year. But still, he still is very active, and recently he invented a temperature control mini twister that he can work from 3 degrees up to 80 degrees, and he can change the temperature in milliseconds. And many people is starting to use that and has been very useful. He has a lot of publication. For example, more than 10 articles are over 1,000 citations. And this article in which they discover a new structure of DNA, the sDNA, has over 4,000 citations. And this is the paper, the first paper that somebody was able to manipulate one molecule in 1989. He received many honors. For example, when he invented in 1993 the magnetic twister, he got the Ugelstad Prize for the invention of this magnetic twister. He also, for his help at this university, he was named visiting professor of our faculty in 2023. And also he has a lot of invitation to give talks and seminar and course around the world, and he always does. He's very generous, as our dean say, because he helped in the formation of a student, help in the development on techniques. And here, for example, you can see a course that he did last year in our faculty with different students of different parts of Latin America. And also, he has been helping science abroad. For example, he built a mini twister and different instruments. He helped in the development of magnetic twister for many science around the world. Also, he helped in the installation of the first single molecule manipulation laboratory in Latin America. This was in Lima, Peru. And he has, as I say, a close collaboration with many Chilean scientists and in Latin America and around the world. That's why we are very happy that Steve is here receiving this award and this recognition. But he is not only a great scientist, he do a lot on other activities. For example, he likes sailing. He has a boat called After You. Here you can see, for example, this is the boat. He like to sail with his two sons, Ryan, that also is here from the United States, and Warren, or maybe the other way around, but Warren and Ryan. And he loves the pets. He will tell you he has more than 20 cats in one moment. And now he has an alpaca, an Latin American alpaca in his house. And he likes to fishing, but he also spread his knowledge for the common people, like the lay person, as he say. He do a lot of outreach of science. You can see a cloud chamber showing like the nuclear particles, and he demonstrate how you can build an instrument to see how the nuclear particles cross around. And yesterday, the director of the SECHEN, the Comisión Chilena de Energía Nuclear, invited us to visit his building and all the nuclear facilities, and we were very happy about that. He also allowed to students go to his laboratory in New Mexico. For example, here is a former student of this university, Francesca Burgos, that now is in Berkeley, and many other students has been in his laboratory at New Mexico. He liked cross-country hiking, and he loved doing the bird watching. And when it's Chile, he always taking pictures about birds. And finally, he not only has created great science, also he has created a beautiful family. I want to show you here Steve with his two child that they are here, Warren and Ryan. Also with his family here growing up, Ryan and Warren, his wife, Sandy, his daughter-in-law, Sarah, and his granddaughter, Sophia. And here you can see they playing around, Steve and Sophia. For all of that, Steve, we want to thank you. You are a real role model for me. I have learning a lot of you. I am really happy. A lot of my science today is because of you, trying to follow you in your step. And you are a really generous person, and everybody is happy with you. And thank you very much, Steve, for all your generosity. Thank you.
Gracias, profesor. Ahora el momento que hemos estado esperando, la parte de escribir la medalla, aunque no se pueda ver. La medalla Doctor Honoris Causa consiste en un disco de oro circular de 38 milímetros. En su anverso cuenta con una leyenda semicircular grabada en la parte superior que dice Universidad de Chile. El escudo de la universidad con los símbolos representativos de sus facultades originarias. Una estrella radiante sobre él rodeada por ramas de encina y laurel. En el reverso tiene una leyenda circular con las palabras Doctor Honoris Causa, seguida del nombre del galardonado. Además, se extiende un diploma con el escudo de la Universidad de Chile, en el que se deja constancia del nombre completo del condecorado y de la actividad particular en la que se destaca, con las firmas, por supuesto, de nuestra rectora y de la prorectora de la Universidad de Chile. Pues bien, ahora bien, la Universidad de Chile ha resuelto conferir esta gran distinción, doctor honoris causa, al doctor Stephen B. Smith, quien se ha destacado por ser pionero en el campo de la manipulación de moléculas individuales de ADN. El extenso y sobresaliente currículum, como pudo explicar el profesor Wilson, acredita que ha contribuido al más alto nivel de la ciencia, realizando innumerables contribuciones y aportes a nivel mundial para el avance de la biofísica. Así que we appreciate again all your work. I think we're really grateful for this moment because I know the room is not full, but I think we can understand how great you are for humanity. So, a continuación, la rectora subrogante de la Universidad de Chile, profesora Alejandra Misala, entregará la medalla doctor honoris causa al doctor Stephen Smith, a quien invitamos a pasar al pie de la testera. Un gran aplauso, por favor. Este es un hito histórico para nuestra facultad. A continuación, dejo con ustedes a la rectora subrogante de la Universidad de Chile, profesora Alejandra Misala, que nos podrá dar unas pequeñas palabras sobre este gran reconocimiento.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Profesor Pablo Richter, decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Químicas y Farmacéuticas. Doctor Stephen Smith, doctor honoris causa de la Universidad de Chile. Profesor Fernando Carrasco, decano de la Facultad de Artes. Profesora Paz Robert, vicedecana de la Facultad de Ciencias Químicas y Farmacéuticas. Profesor Christian Wilson, director de Relaciones Internacionales de la Facultad de Ciencias Químicas y Farmacéuticas. Muchas gracias por su presentación. Académicos, estudiantes, comunidad universitaria. Es un verdadero honor para la Universidad de Chile conferir la distinción honoris causa al profesor Stephen Smith. Hoy celebramos no solo a un investigador excepcional, como ya se decía, sino también a un referente ético y humano cuya obra ha transformado la ciencia y ha dejado huella en nuestra institución. La historia académica del doctor Smith, como ya se ha dicho, se distingue por su capacidad visionaria para abrir campos de investigación inéditos. Fue pionero en la manipulación de moléculas individuales, como se explicó, hazaña que hace algunas décadas parecía impensable. A él debemos la invención de instrumentos revolucionarios, como ya se ha dicho, las magnéticas tweezers y las mini tweezers, que permiten explorar la estructura interna del ADN y comprender mejor los mecanismos que sustentan la vida. Gracias a estos avances, científicos de todo el mundo cuentan hoy con herramientas que cambiaron para siempre la forma de abordar el estudio de las enfermedades. Por eso podemos decir que la trayectoria del doctor Smith nos recuerda que la ciencia se mide no solo por métricas o índices de citación, aunque en su caso, como ya se decía, alcanzan cifras extraordinarias. Su verdadero valor está en la capacidad de transformar la vida de millones de personas. Al cambiar la manera en que se estudian y tratan las enfermedades, su investigación ha tenido un impacto profundo en la salud y bienestar de la humanidad. El doctor Smith ha sido también un promotor generoso, como también nos explicaban antes, quienes me precedieron en la palabra, muy generoso en la cooperación académica. Su colaboración con el doctor Carlos Bustamante, otro gran referente de la biofísica molecular dio origen a una de las áreas más dinámicas de la ciencia contemporánea. Y en nuestro país, su trabajo conjunto con investigadores e investigadoras de la Facultad de Ciencias Químicas y Farmacéuticas, particularmente los profesores Cristian Wilson y Mauricio Báez, ha fortalecido capacidades nacionales, instalado equipamientos de última generación y formado nuevas generaciones de científicos y científicas. La Universidad de Chile reconoce con esta distinción no solo a un científico de excelencia, sino también a un amigo de nuestra comunidad, a quienes queremos expresar nuestra profunda gratitud. La instalación de equipos como los mini tweezers en esta facultad y su constante disposición a colaborar muestran que el conocimiento alcanza su máxima potencia cuando se comparte, cuando se construye con otros y otras en un esfuerzo colectivo. Esta ceremonia se inscribe en una larga tradición de la Universidad de Chile, que como se decía también lo decía el decano, desde 1954, cuando Gabriela Mistral fue la primera en recibir esta distinción, hemos honrado a quienes con su obra y ejemplo han favorecido el progreso de la humanidad. Hoy, 70 años después, el profesor Smith se suma a esta constelación de personalidades cuya excelencia ha engrandecido nuestra casa de estudio y ha proyectado nuestra misión pública. Por cierto, no puedo dejar de subrayar el contexto en que celebramos hoy la entrega de esta distinción. La ciencia vive en el presente un momento complejo. Voces que desinforman, discursos ideológicos que niegan el cambio climático o desconfían de las vacunas, intentan disminuir el valor del conocimiento científico y socavar el prestigio de las universidades. Frente a ello, la trayectoria del doctor Smith es un recordatorio luminoso de por qué la ciencia debe ser defendida con convicción. Su trabajo científico nos habla de curiosidad, de rigor y de apertura intelectual, valores que también son pilares de la vida universitaria. Y en este sentido, su obra dialoga con los principios que como universidad defendemos: libertad de pensamiento, integridad en la investigación y compromiso con la sociedad. Reconocerlo hoy es también renovar nuestro compromiso con estos valores y reafirmar la centralidad del conocimiento en el desarrollo para tener un mejor país. Profesor Smith, la Universidad de Chile lo acoge con orgullo como doctor honoris causa. Esperamos que este vínculo siga creciendo y que su ejemplo siga inspirando a generaciones de científicos y científicas, no solo en Chile, sino también en América Latina. Para nuestra universidad es una gran alegría contar con su amistad y con su ejemplo, que ilumina un camino de la ciencia, que es una ciencia con generosidad y excelencia. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos a nuestra rectora subrogante. Seguimos con la música, así que la soprano Virginia Barrios nos interpretará el tema Blue Van You de Roy Orbison y Joe Melson. Un gran aplauso, por favor.
I feel so bad, I go it for it mind. I'm so lonesome all the time. Since I left my baby behind on Blue Bayou. 7 nickels, 7 dimes, walking to the sun and shine. looking forward to happy times on blue bayou. I'm going back someday, playing with me to blue bayou. Where the folks are fine, and the light is mine and blue bayou. And the others fishing boats with the sails afloat, if I could only see that familiar sunrise, with sleepy eyes, how happy I'd be. Gonna see my baby again. Gonna be right, never a friends. Maybe I feel better again on blue bayou. Saving nickels, saving dimes, working till the sun don't shine. Looking forward to happy times on blue bayou. I'm going back someday, call up me to blue bayou. Where the fields are fine, all the world is mine on blue bayou. Where these fishing boats with the sails afloat, if I could only see that familiar sunrise, with sleepy eyes, how happy I'd be. A boy of mine, by my side, the silver moon and the evening tide. Oh, some sweet day, gonna take away this heart inside. Will I never be blue? My dreams come true. On blue bayou.
Agradecemos nuevamente a nuestros artistas. A continuación se dirige a ustedes el Dr. Stephen Smith, quien dictará la conferencia magistral titulada Early Days of Single Molecule Manipulation with DNA. So, Mr. Stephen, the stage is all yours. Y también invito a nuestro decano y a la rectora subrogante a tomar asiento en la primera fila.
My many thanks to the University of Chile and to Professor Richter and Mizala for those wonderful introductions. I'm very happy to be here. It's an honor to give this talk and to receive this important award. My talk today will be about early developments in the observation and manipulation of single DNA molecules. And I first became interested in science when I was 10 years old. Well, perhaps maybe even a little earlier than 10. So my parents bought for me a book, which is called The Boy Electrician by Alfred P. Morgan. And this book had been written 20 years before I was born, so it had some very old technology and science written in it, but it was all very new to me, and an important start for my love of science. It would tell you how to build instruments, for instance. Here is a picture of an ammeter or a voltmeter. This is the analog type of meter, which you don't see so much of these days. Nowadays, they're all digital meters, but occasionally, if you visit a nuclear reactor, you can still see some of the analog meters, and I like them very much. And see, can you see a mouse on here? I guess not. Oh, there it is. Can you see a pointer? Let's see. Let's see if I do this. We're working on that. Oh, I was thinking, yes. Yes, that's it. Okay. This is, for instance, the bobbin on which you wind the wires that make the magnetic field that runs this meter. Also in the same book, there were interesting experiments in plasma physics, which these were called Giesler tubes, which were like neon signs, except this book was written before there were fluorescent lights. And after there were fluorescent lights, there were LED lamps. So technology has advanced twice since this book was written. But the book inspired me to, and here, for instance, is an early X-ray tube. The book inspired me to study physics and be interested in science. So 30 years later, I was studying at night to get my master's degree in physics, but during the day, I was electronic technician for the genetics department at the University of Washington in Seattle. And my job there was to repair or build experimental equipment such as electrophoresis apparatus. Gel electrophoresis, as many of you probably know, is a way of separating DNA and identifying the size of the DNA molecules. And up here at the top, the DNA is loaded into a gel, and an electric field drives them through the agarose gel so that the small ones arrive farthest and the big ones are retarded toward the top. However, this method back in the 1980s always failed to separate DNA molecules that were longer than 100 kilobases. They all ran near the top at the same speed, whether they were 1 megabase or 100 kilobases. But new methods were being developed in the 1980s to separate those molecules by size. And for instance, these are some of the apparatus. I didn't make these. Well, actually, I did make this one, the round one. But the pulse field gel is one in which the electric field is alternated forward and backwards, and that actually is the periodic inversion gel. And then other gels would have the direction of the electric field changed with time, so that the DNA molecules would form some sort of a zigzag path through the gel. But the fact is, nobody knew in the late 1980s what sort of path or why this method was working. So since I was in the genetics department and since they had a new fluorescence microscope, I tried to see the molecules of DNA actually going through agarose gel. And here's my power supply, which was a 9-volt transistor battery. This is a microscope slide. Underneath it is a glass cover slip, a glass slide, and between the two is agarose gel. And here is the objective lens for the fluorescence microscope. Now, what you would see in this microscope was DNA at various depths. This is lambda-phage DNA, which is 48,000 base pairs long. And some of these molecules, they're all at different depths, so some of them are out of focus. However, if you go near the top of the gel, they are all in focus, and you can see them first wiggling by Brownian motion, just thermal motion. And then when the electric field is applied, they will start to move across the top of this gel. You will notice that they behave like elastic rubber bands. That is, they seem to get long when they're caught and then bunch up into something short when they are free. So the question, one of the questions that I had about it, and everybody does, is why is DNA actually a rubber band? Why is it elastic? And it's called entropic elasticity. It means that here, for instance, is a picture of this is a model of DNA called the freely jointed chain, in which the DNA is modeled as straight segments with perfectly free joints or hinges periodically down the chain. And if there's no force, it forms a random coil, which generally is small. If, on the other hand, there's a force, all these segments tend to align because they're being pulled by this force, and it extends it so that the entropy is from the thermal motion of the liquid hitting the sides of the molecule and bunching it up. This can be quantified using as a force by integrating the possibility for the orientation of a segment can be represented as a sphere. The energy of this segment falls off as force times distance right there. And the force is what is provided by the external pulling, and the distance is how high up this angle tilts. So it's the cosine of theta times the force. If you use Boltzmann distribution, which is the probability of something to have a certain energy in a thermal bath, and then integrate the positions of this link over this entire sphere, you end up with a function. We're integrating the partition function, and we're determining the expectation value end-to-end distance. It is this function, the hyperbolic cotangent of force times b over kt. And okay, so one of the characteristics of this is that if the segments are long, it is easy to align or pull the molecule to a length. If the segments are short, it becomes more resistant to alignment. It tends to be shorter. Okay. So one of the things I wrote as a early paper while I was still an electronic technician was this the idea that you could measure the charge on DNA by looking at how long the molecule would become if I give it an electric field. So here is a microphotograph of molecules stuck on the surface of the gel, and they are getting longer when I give it a higher voltage, and they got shorter when I give it a low voltage. So I could, in a sense, do something to these molecules. It was my ambition to find out how strong was the force, and I could use that freely jointed chain equation to tell me from the length of the molecule what was the force on the molecule. And from that and the electric field, I could determine what was the charge on the DNA, or what was, oops, we've advanced a little too far. Okay, so what happened was that I discovered that it was indeed a very low equivalent charge on the molecule of only 0.05 electrons per phosphate. And everybody would normally say that a phosphate ought to have -1 electric charge. But there are several factors that reduce the electric charge on a molecule in solution. One of them, which is called counter-ion condensation. That means that ions that are also the positive ions, monovalent in this case, would actually stick to the DNA molecule down to the point where only about 1/4 of an electron would exist per phosphate. But from my force experiments, it was believed that 1/4 was normal, but I got 0.05. So I was seeing extremely low electronic charge. About this time, I met Carlos at a conference, and we decided that I should, and I had gotten my degree from the University of Washington, and I decided I should join his lab in New Mexico. So I packed up my family, my wife, my sons were here, my mother-in-law, and 18 cats at that point. Later, we got up to 30, I believe. These were mother-in-law's cats, not my cats. And moved to New Mexico. And there we explored more of the electrophoresis mystery, why it is that the big ones are separated from the little ones using pulse field gel. This PFGE stands for pulse field gel electrophoresis. And yes, here, let me show you. We made simulations, computer simulations of the motion of DNA through the gels. Let's see if I maybe I. The one on the left is the great field, right? So that was, but there's a problem with a simulation like that, and that's that it uses a lot of fitting parameters, what we call fudge factors, which are a way of cheating in your simulation to make it look right when it finally gets played. So we didn't really know how large was the DNA contractive force, except from this freely jointed chain model, which was somewhat crude, and how large is the electric force on the DNA, except from my experiment, which it turns out had some problems, which I'll tell you about. So we needed to actually manipulate single molecules to measure the forces in order to understand electrophoresis. Now, magnetic beads can make these small forces in the femtonewton range, 10 to the minus 15 newtons. And there was a company made the proper shape and size beads called Dynal. And we calibrated the force on these beads as we would approach them with the magnet. They would start to move through the fluid, and we calculated the force as by Stokes' law, which is 6 pi times the radius of the bead, the viscosity of the water, and the velocity that we measure for it. And after calibrating the beads, we could attach the DNA to them and make this first magnetic tweezers that was mentioned in the introduction. So that is attached to the magnetic bead by streptavidin and biotin, and attached at this end by an antibody to digioxygenin. Digioxygenin. Yes, a dig antibody, as we say. And this molecule was quite long. It was 2 lambdas hooked together, a dimer. And this is the schematic of our first magnetic tweezers, which was the same same microscope with magnets that would move to the side and attract the magnetic bead. But we had a flow of liquid up the center, which could provide an additional force. And here is, let's see if we can. There we go. There we're attracting it to the left with a magnet. And you see these molecules in the center here are just going with the flow. This one, however, is that dimer of lambda being attracted to the right or to the left. And we know the force, and we can see the distance, and we can compare the force versus distance with the freely jointed chain model. And it didn't work, which is a great opportunity in science when it doesn't work, because it means there's another theory that has to be applied. And for a while that was a mystery, but in another 2 years, we had collaborators with John Marco and Eric Sija at Cornell University, and they provided us with a new model for DNA, which is called the worm-like chain model, in which the entropy of the entropic elasticity is due to bends in a continuous rod. So it's a different type of model. It fits the data very well. That is, this is a semi-log graph of my force versus distance measurement. And the black line, the little crosses are the magnetic data. That's what I get from the experiment. The black line is what would have been predicted by the freely jointed chain, and the blue line is the fit to the worm-like chain. So it was a great, it was a wonderfully matched experiment to the model. And people are still using this for many applications. This is called an approximation interpolation formula to it. Actually, let me go back to that for a minute. Up here, this molecule starts to get off of the worm-like chain model, or to not agree. It gets longer than it should. in fact, the molecule is beginning to extend, and with that flow force, we could actually make the molecule jump to a much longer distance. So we needed a stronger test force in order to test our molecules. And so we used the laser optical trap, which was developed at Bell Labs, primarily by Arthur Ashkin. This is his paper in 1982 about trapping a bead in a laser beam. And also on the same paper that there's two Nobel laureates, there's Arthur Ashkin and there's Stephen Chu also was an author on this paper. The idea is that a beam of light carries momentum. And if that light is focused by an objective lens to a focus here, the light rays become bent when they go around. And this is a plastic or glass bead in the water. The light rays are deflected in a curve, and that deflection of the momentum causes a reaction force that pulls the bead upwards, and it pulls it toward the focus of the trap. So here I'll show you what it would look like in, let's see here. In a movie. There is a plastic bead being moved to the end of a glass pipette. And here the pipette is squirting liquid in and out. And the bead is undergoing force and finally sucked to the pipette. But you might notice that when the bead moves to the edge of the light beam, the light is deflected in an opposite direction. So that deflection of the light can be used to compute what is the force on the bead. If we know that the rate of change or the momentum flux of a light beam is proportional to the power of the beam times the index of refraction of water divided by the speed of light. When that beam gets deflected through an angle theta, this vector of force momentum gets changed to a new one with a change in momentum vector that looks like this one on this end. And here is the reaction force. For every change in momentum, there is required a force. And that force, if we know the angle theta, and if we know the power of the beam, we can compute what is the lateral force on the bead, which is this sum, n times the power of the beam divided by the speed of light times sine of theta. And the same thing can be done for the forward force. So all we need to do to know the force on the bead is collect the light and analyze it. Well, here is an early device that we made to collect the light that is due to a bead being pulled. Here is a DNA molecule. Here is a glass pipette with a bead at one end. Here's a DNA molecule. There's a bead that is trapped at the objective focus from this laser beam. Here's the laser. We use polarization. The electric vector of the light here is vertically polarized, and so it goes through this beam splitter, goes through two what's called quarter wave plates, and because of the change in polarization, it bounces off this beam splitter and goes to this thing called a position detector. It detects both the intensity and also how that angle, that theta that we're trying to get the sine of. So by taking the signals from this laser to that position detector, and this laser goes to that position detector, and adding them together, we get the total force on the bead that's in the optical trap, which happens to be the same force as the tension in the DNA molecule. So this is a picture of Yu Sui, who helped me develop that instrument in Carlos's lab. And the first paper we wrote with it, which I think was shown on in the introduction, was 1996, which is called overstretching DNA, which is that strange force above 65 piconewtons, what happens to the molecule. And also we tested single-stranded DNA. So far I've been showing double-stranded, but we got to single-stranded. Okay. And what you actually see in this graph is two versions of the same DNA molecule. That is, the one in red is the vertical axis is force. The horizontal axis is end-to-end extension. And this is a long piece of DNA. It's a half of a lambda. And the force at this point starts to pick up because of the entropic elasticity. And at this point, which is about 65 piconewtons, it rather mysteriously gets much longer. That is, this was a new discovery that DNA will extend by an extra 70% if you exceed 65 piconewtons in force. And at the end of that transition, the force goes up again. However, if you melt off one of the two strands, this is what the DNA looks like. It's this blue line, which is quite different. It's longer. It has a longer ultimate length, contour length, because the DNA is no longer twisted around. The two strands are not twisted together. Only one strand is present. Furthermore, the entropic elasticity is actually higher at most points. At points less than the contour length, entropic elasticity of single-stranded DNA is much higher. And from that, you can compute the persistence length, which is for single-stranded 0.7 nanometers, and for double-stranded it is 53 nanometers. So double-stranded DNA is a long, stiff rod, whereas single-stranded is a flexible, highly with short persistence length rod. Let's see. Going somehow. Well, I'm in some mode here that does not advance. Why is that? Help. Okay. Okay, it has advanced. The question is, what is this overstretched double-stranded DNA, which was named S form for stretched. And so we came up with some hypothetical possibilities, you know. What we could tell by just pulling it and looking at its behavior was it must be longer, which means it must be underwound. It could be a flat ladder. It could be in some sort of a tilted flat ladder, but it certainly had a behavior of nicks. That is, if there was a break in one of the strands, it peeled back. And that was responsible for this little hysteresis right here section. This is pulling it out and then relaxing it back, and it takes a slightly different path back. And that's There's quite a delay, isn't there? Okay. Okay. So it peels back in some cases, and it takes some time to re-anneal or when going back. But still, this is we still don't know too much about it at that point. What we later learned was that it really only occurs for CG-rich sequences in high salt concentration. You can't test it by crystallizing it because it's a single molecule effect. And so obviously the twist is reduced. The question might be, how much is it reduced? How much does the twist of the single-stranded vary? And we have very talented graduate student, now a professor at Stanford. His name is Zeb Bryant, who helped us do an experiment where we could actually measure the twist of double-stranded DNA by attaching it between two beads. This bead would be on a pipette, and this bead would be in the optical trap. This bead here would be attached in the middle, which means you had to make an interesting chimera of DNA, which had a, what is it? A digoxygen at this end, a streptavidin, actually a biotin section here in the middle, and a, let's see, this is, a fluorescein section at the bottom. So that could, and this bead is coated with anti-fluorescein. So it's possible to hook up this 3-bead apparatus and actually twist the pipette and see what happens to the elasticity of the molecule. And as long as the flow is going, it holds this bead steady. So let's see what twisting it looks like. Okay. Let's see. There we go. We're hooking up the 3rd bead, which is that little bead at the bottom. Now it's in the middle. Now it's being stretched. This indicator on the edge is indicating the force that we feel on the bead that's in the trap. So what did we learn about S-form DNA? What we did was we made the tension greater than 65 piconewtons. The S form would convert from B form into the overstretched form, and this bead would spin around. Let's see. There we go, like that. And this part would go upwards with time. Here is a 16x. Here's the time lapse picture over here. And you might notice that this bead is going upward. So we can know when we get to the end of the transition because the force goes above 65 and it doesn't spin anymore. And indeed, here's a graph of time on the bottom, the force on the top, it's applied, and the twist in the molecule, it continually changes. Let's see, the twist is the red line. The twist goes down, 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 and then the force is relaxed and the twist goes up. So the bead spins first one direction and then the other if we pull it and then relax it. From that, you can learn that about 30% of the natural twist of double-stranded DNA remains in the S form. Now, there are some provisos to that because probably this piece of lambda DNA is not uniformly S form. So it's possible that some of it has gone to completely melted and some of it has a higher twist. But if you wanted to learn more about it, you could look at this article here. But in general, it proves that the DNA is not entirely melted. If it were entirely melted form, it would have completed 100% of the twist that exists in double-stranded DNA. Okay, back to the question of electrophoresis. I did an experiment to see what was the force on DNA when it was inside of an agarose gel. And that's similar to that one with the picture that I mentioned had some problems. The problem was that the number for the electron charge was extremely low. So what we did was we attached double-stranded DNA, a long piece, to some bead, held it in the force measuring optical trap, and applied an electric field through the buffer, and the bead was in the buffer, and measured the force on the bead when that molecule entered an agarose gel. So here's a schematic picture of what is in our fluidic chamber. It consists of a channel with buffer in it, a channel with agarose in it, and a little hole, a cylindrical cavity that's made in the agarose by pulling out a wire. And through here goes the optical trap, like there. And when you put the bead over here next to this wall and you run the electric field to the right, the force on the DNA is rather low. And switching the electric field from right to left makes the force on the DNA go from about this level to, actually switches it from this level to that level right there. However, if you let the molecule enter the gel, the force goes much higher. When I switch the electric field so that the molecules entering the gel, the force goes 3.5 times higher than it does just in the buffer. So, and the reason for that is that in the case when DNA is just in liquid, these counterions that are near the surface of the DNA, they flow backwards. The DNA is pulled to the right, the counterions are pulled to the left. They exert friction on the DNA, and that friction reduces its force. So it makes it look like it has a low charge. But when DNA is inside of a gel or closed like this, the counterion flow is slowed down by friction with the gel on the outside, and the DNA feels the entire force. So the results were that I got an effective, the results were I saw a charge on the bare bead by itself. I saw an effective charge in free electrophoresis, that means not in the gel, of 0.04 electrons per phosphate, which is even worse than the original experiment. And then but inside the gel, the force went up to the equivalent of 0.15 electrons per phosphate, which is still not quite as much as the counter-ion condensation number. But if you consider that when the DNA is inside the gel, it takes a tortuous path. Part of that force is being supported by the gel. So if you account for some contraction of the DNA inside the gel, it works out that it's simply the case that the phosphate has 1/4 of an electron, not the electron. The DNA has essentially 1/4 of an electron every time it has a phosphate. So my conclusion is that building instruments is fun. And I really have had a lot of fun in science by making these things, making these experiments that I've described, including the mini tweezers, which is shown over here. And I want to thank my co-authors from all those experiments and time that I spent having fun. So thank you for listening to my talk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steven. Ahora doy cuenta que los había vuelto a invitar a la primera fila, pero son cosas que pasan cuando uno va off script. Quería ver si estaban atentos. Para finalizar esta ceremonia, nos despedimos con el coro In Gaudium, dirigido por Patricio Álvarez, quienes nos interpretarán el himno de la Universidad de Chile. Así que, por favor, a todos los presentes, de pie para disfrutar de la música. De esta forma damos por finalizada esta gran ceremonia. Y bueno, como recordatorio a Mr. Steven, I think you're a great example of real science because it's made with humanity, honor, wisdom, and the ability to share it with the world. Así que muchas gracias, thank you very much. Invitamos a todos los presentes a un cóctel a la salida del salón. Muchas gracias. Un gran aplauso para despedir esta oportunidad.